My sister left her kids home alone just so she could go out. And when I reported it, I was made the villain in the story. You know that feeling when you tell yourself something is temporary? Just a weird phase everyone will laugh about later? Well, I once tried to convince myself that my mother using my apartment as a free, full-time daycare for my sister's kids was just that. And I know how delusional that sounds now. But at the time, it felt easier to believe than to admit I was being completely walked over, in slow motion. I was 32, a financial consultant, obsessed with my promotion track and my neat, color-coded calendar. My mother loved to remind me that since I'd chosen my career over a family, I obviously had more free time than everyone else. Which was funny, because I was always the one answering client emails at 10 at night, staring at spreadsheets until my eyes burned. My sister, Emma, was the opposite in every possible way. Younger, loud, messy, with 3 kids by 2 different fathers who were basically ghosts. One sent money whenever he remembered, the other treated his weekends as optional. And somewhere along the line, my mother decided that meant I owed it to the universe to make up for everybody else's choices. The key to my apartment was supposed to be for emergencies only. That was the whole point years earlier when I was traveling every other week for work. My mother insisted she needed a way to water my plants, check smoke detectors, and make sure I hadn't been kidnapped by my own furniture, or whatever dramatic scenario she came up with. So, I handed over a copy and tried not to think too much about it. At the beginning, it really was occasional. A quick text asking if the kids could stay with me on a Saturday afternoon while Emma went to a doctor's appointment. A last-minute favor because a babysitter had cancelled. And I told myself it wasn't a big deal. I loved my nieces and nephew. And honestly, I felt guilty sometimes for being the only one in the family who could buy takeout without checking my bank account twice. Then the favors turned into expectations. The expectations turned into demands. And the demands stopped coming with any advance notice at all. Just my mother appearing at my door with 3 kids in mismatched clothes, dropping bags on my floor like a tornado, and saying she'd explain later before rushing off to give my sister her much-needed break. The first time she did it on a weeknight, I was standing in my tiny kitchen in work clothes, heating leftover pasta, mentally rehearsing a presentation for the next morning. And suddenly there was a knock, and then my door opened before I even reached it because, of course, she didn't even wait for an answer. She just walked in with the kids trailing behind her like it was the most normal thing in the world. She said Emma had a very important appointment she couldn't miss, which already sounded suspicious. Before I knew it, my living room looked like a daycare, with crayons everywhere, shoes in random places, and the 3-year-old climbing onto my coffee table. I swallowed the frustration and told myself it was fine, that I could work later, that family comes first. All those little sayings people throw around when they need you to sacrifice your time, but never theirs. The 8-year-old, with that blunt way kids have, asked why they spent more time at my place than at their own home. I laughed it off and changed the subject, but the question lodged itself in the back of my brain like a splinter I pretended I didn't feel. After that, it became 3 or 4 times a week. Always with some reason that sounded just plausible enough to make me doubt my own irritation if I tried to push back. And my mother had a talent for turning any hesitation into proof that I was cold and selfish, the child who chose money over love. Emma loved to play the mothers have it harder card, talking about sleepless nights and never having time for herself. And I'm not saying those things aren't real. But I started noticing that whenever she dropped the kids off with me, she didn't look tired or overwhelmed. She looked excited, like someone about to go on a mini vacation. Full makeup, cute outfits, perfume that screamed, this was not about therapy or self-care. This was about dates. She would breeze in, kiss the kids on the forehead, promise to be back not too late, and then disappear into the night while I ordered pizza and tried to pretend I wasn't panicking about the work I wasn't doing and the sleep I wasn't getting. The turning point came on a random Tuesday. I had already canceled an important client call once that month because of a last-minute babysitting emergency, and my boss had given me that polite but sharp look that said she wasn't going to accept many more surprises. I was on my couch, laptop open, trying to finalize a proposal, when a picture popped up on my phone from a mutual acquaintance, someone who didn't know about my involuntary nanny gig and just wanted to share something funny. It was Emma, at a bar, holding a brightly colored drink, standing next to a guy I'd never seen, with a caption about living her best life tagged at a place that was definitely not a doctor's office or a support group. The timestamp on the photo was from the exact same night my mother had showed up breathless at my door saying there had been an emergency and Emma needed to clear her head before she did something drastic. I remember staring at the screen, my stomach dropping. I had this weird, double feeling of anger and humiliation. Like the joke had been on me for a long time, and everyone else knew it. Once I noticed that, I couldn't unsee anything anymore. So, I did the thing you're not supposed to admit out loud because it sounds obsessive and petty. I went full detective on her social media. I scrolled. I clicked. I zoomed in on backgrounds. I checked timestamps. I checked comments. I took screenshots. I built what honestly looked like a ridiculous little evidence folder on my laptop because I needed to see the pattern laid out in front of me to convince myself I wasn't just overreacting. What I found was exactly what that first photo suggested: 4 to 5 nights a week out at bars, parties, concerts, random events. Always dressed for the kind of fun that doesn't end early, with captions about being a free woman, living her best life, not letting anything tie her down. Under those posts, my mother had left little heart emojis and comments about how proud she was to see her daughter finally taking care of herself, which stung more than I expected. The worst part was the group posts, the ones from private circles where she clearly forgot I could still see things through mutual friends. There, she joked about not mentioning her kids on first dates so she wouldn't scare men away, laughing about how she'd wait until at least the third outing to talk about the baggage. There were screenshots of conversations where she told guys she was spontaneous and always up for last-minute plans. And I wanted to throw my phone because I knew exactly how she managed to be that person, by dropping 3 children on my couch or leaving them with our mother at the last second while she sprinted out the door. At one point, she wrote that it was so convenient to have a sister with no kids because it meant she could still live a little, and I had to close my laptop and sit on the floor for a minute because the mix of anger and sadness was a lot. The next day, after pretending to sleep for about 3 hours and showing up to work with extra concealer and too much coffee in my system, I texted Emma. I need to talk. Face to face. No kids, no mother. Just us. She tried to dodge me. Said she was busy. Then suggested we talk on the phone. But I insisted, and eventually she agreed to meet at a neutral place, a coffee shop that wasn't one of her usual hunting grounds. I showed up early, with my laptop in my bag and the evidence folder ready. My heart pounded like I was going into a client negotiation. Except this time, there was no way to pretend it wasn't personal. When she arrived, she looked like she'd walked out of one of her posts, fresh hair, manicure, eyeliner perfect. And she hugged me like nothing was wrong, like we were just 2 sisters catching up. I didn't ease into it. I couldn't. Because if I gave myself any wiggle room, I would end up minimizing everything again. So, I opened my laptop, turned it around, and started scrolling through the folder while she blinked at the screen. Pictures, dates, captions, messages, all lined up next to my calendar screenshots of the nights she had dropped the kids with me or sent my mother with them. Each emergency sitting right next to a selfie in some crowded club. At first, she laughed. Said I was being dramatic, that everybody posts more than they actually go out, that the timing was just a coincidence. But as I kept clicking, and it became obvious how consistent the overlap was, the laughter faded. She shifted from denial to justification so fast it made my head spin, saying mothers have a right to have fun, that she'd sacrificed her 20s to diapers and tantrums, that she needed to feel attractive again after being left by 2 useless men. That I wouldn't understand because I'd never had to wipe a kid's nose at 3 a.m. I told her I wasn't saying she could never go out. That I wasn't trying to punish her for wanting a life. But that using her kids and my schedule as invisible scaffolding for every single plan she made was not okay anymore. I said I was done being the on-call babysitter for strangers she'd met on some app. That I needed at least 48 hours notice if she wanted help. And that my work was not some optional little hobby she could override whenever she felt like it. She rolled her eyes and called me rigid. Accused me of being jealous because I didn't have kids. Said I would understand one day when I woke up alone and realized my spreadsheets couldn't hug me. That one hurt. Not because I secretly wanted children right then, but because it hit that old nerve my mother had installed years ago, the one that said I had chosen wrong and would pay for it later. I stuck to my boundary anyway, mostly out of sheer stubbornness and the quiet terror that if I caved at that moment, I would never claw back any control. I repeated that from now on, I would say no if it was last minute. That I would not cancel meetings or rearrange my schedule because some guy suddenly texted her at 6 in the evening. And that my apartment was not her personal drop-off point. She crossed her arms, said, "Fine, do whatever you want," and stormed out, leaving her half-finished drink on the table. I sat there staring at the empty chair for a long time, feeling both victorious and sick, because drawing a line doesn't magically make you feel good. It just means you're fully aware of the explosion you probably just triggered. The explosion showed up faster than I thought. A week later, on the morning of one of the biggest presentations of my career, the kind where the wrong person noticing your shaky voice can derail your promotion for an entire year, I was in the office early rehearsing my talking points in front of the bathroom mirror like a nerd. Then the phone on my desk started ringing. The receptionist said there was a family emergency situation in the lobby and that they needed me to come down right away. My stomach dropped because that phrase had been weaponized so many times that it barely meant anything anymore. But this was my workplace, not my living room, so I couldn't just ignore it. I took the elevator down, telling myself it was probably a quick issue. Maybe my mother had locked herself out of her car or something minor. The moment the doors opened, I knew I had been lying to myself again. My mother was standing in the middle of the lobby with all 3 kids clustered around her, backpacks half open, hair messy, the youngest already rubbing his eyes like he was about to cry. And she looked straight at me with this mix of triumph and exasperation that made me want to turn around and walk back into the elevator. She told me Emma had a very important appointment she couldn't miss, that there had been some scheduling disaster, that she had no choice but to bring the kids to me because who else was available in the middle of the morning? And she said all this loud enough that the security guard and the woman from accounting at the seating area could hear every word. I reminded her, also in the middle of the lobby because apparently privacy was dead, that I had told them both that days like this were off limits. That I had a major presentation in less than 20 minutes and couldn't just disappear upstairs with 3 kids in tow. She looked offended and started raising her voice, accusing me of putting money over family in front of my coworkers. And then the kids started crying, because of course they did. They weren't props. They were confused little humans stuck in a drama they didn't ask for. A couple of my coworkers walked by on their way to the conference room, slowing down just enough to confirm that yes, the rumor about my complicated home life was absolutely true. I felt my cheeks burning. I wish I could say I held my ground and let my mother deal with the mess she had created. But I didn't. I broke. Right there in the lobby, with 3 kids crying and my mother calling me heartless. I said I would take them. That I would figure it out. And I watched her face relax as if this had been the plan all along. She practically skipped out of the building while I hustled the kids to the elevator, trying to answer their questions and text my boss at the same time, explaining that some unexpected family situation had come up and I would not be able to present after all. The kids ended up in an empty conference room with my tablet and some snacks from the vending machine while the meeting went on without me. And I sat on the floor in the break room for 10 minutes, shaking and trying not to cry, because I knew exactly what that would look like to the people upstairs: unreliable, distracted, not leadership material. The next day, my boss called me into her office, and the conversation was exactly what I had rehearsed in my nightmares. She wasn't cruel, but she was honest. She told me that while she understood that life throws curveballs, the higher I climbed in the company, the less tolerance there would be for last-minute cancellations, especially when the entire leadership team had gathered for a presentation I was supposed to deliver. She said some people had expressed concerns about whether I had too much going on outside of work to handle the next step up. And even though she assured me that my performance was still strong, I could hear the subtext loud and clear. When the promotion list came out a few weeks later, my name was not on it. The person who got the role instead of me was someone I had been mentoring for the past year. I smiled, congratulated her, and then went to cry in a bathroom stall like a teenager. Meanwhile, Emma showed up at my apartment to collect the kids after that lobby incident, like she was picking up a package that had been held at the front desk a little too long. She was hungover, wearing sunglasses indoors, smelling faintly of whatever drink had been on special the night before. And she gave me this half-hearted thanks that sounded more like an afterthought than genuine gratitude. She made some comment about how the date had been a disaster anyway because the guy turned out to be boring. I stood there with my eyes burning, thinking about the opportunity one had just watched slip through my fingers while she treated the whole thing like a minor inconvenience. When I told her about the promotion later, she shrugged and said I should relax more, because work was not everything. Not long after that, the school started calling me. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe they had meant to call Emma and dialed the wrong number. But the secretary explained that my number was listed as an emergency contact and that they had been unable to reach Emma or my mother. The kids had been left waiting for pickup for almost 2 hours, and the staff was getting worried. I left work early again, drove over there, and found the three of them sitting on a bench near the office. The oldest trying to keep the younger ones occupied with some game they had clearly run out of patience for. When I asked if this had happened before, the 8-year-old shrugged and said it was normal, that sometimes mom runs late or grandma forgets. On the ride back to my place, they casually dropped little bombs of information that made my stomach knot up, talking about nights when they had stayed home alone because mom had to go out for a little while, or evenings when they had eaten cereal for dinner because there was nothing else ready and nobody around. The 8-year-old kept slipping into this adult tone, talking about keeping an eye on the 5-year-old and the 3-year-old, making sure they didn't do dangerous stuff. And I realized she had been given a role she never should have had, forced to be a mini parent before she had even hit double digits. When I confronted Emma about it, she had an answer ready, like she had rehearsed it in front of a mirror. She said the kid was very mature for her age, that she never left them longer than a few hours, that she made sure the door was locked and the television was on and their phones were nearby, as if those things magically replaced an actual adult. She threw in some tears for good measure, talking about how lonely she felt, how she had lost her identity after becoming a mother, how she needed to feel like a real person again and not just someone's caretaker. For a moment, I felt the old sympathy tug at me. The part of me that had always stepped in to fix things. But then she said people without kids would never understand that kind of loneliness, and I snapped back into myself. I told her straight up that leaving 3 kids alone in an apartment at night so she could flirt with men in bars was not a coping mechanism. It was negligence. And that if she didn't stop, I was going to report it. She accused me of betrayal. Said I was threatening to destroy her life instead of helping her. Said I was playing the hero at her expense. And I hated that she made it sound like some power trip when all I could picture were those kids sitting on a couch in the dark, listening for sounds in the hallway and pretending not to be scared. I left that conversation shaking with the kind of adrenaline you get after almost getting hit by a car. And I knew there was no way back to the cozy illusion that this was just a rough patch. So, I did the unthinkable, at least in my family. I started documenting everything. Not just the social media posts and the missed pickups, but also the times my mother showed up unannounced with the kids and the excuses she gave. I noted dates and times, saved voicemails, took pictures of the kids falling asleep on my couch with their shoes still on because nobody had helped them get ready for bed before dropping them off. I found out Emma had profiles on multiple dating apps, juggling conversations with men in different parts of town, scheduling back-to-back dates like she was playing some kind of game where extra points were awarded for spontaneity. And every spontaneous night meant the kids landed on me or my mother without warning. The more I dug, the more it became clear that the kids were not just incidental to her plans. They were obstacles she was constantly trying to work around or hide. I saw messages where she told men she didn't have kids, where she wrote that she was totally free on any night, and joked about how she didn't have to check in with anyone. And I wanted to throw my phone across the room. In another post in a private group, she bragged about how convenient it was to have a mother and a sister she could drop the little ones with so she could keep her options open. My mother, by the way, knew about all of it. In one thread, she commented that her daughter deserved to feel young again and that people should not judge a woman for wanting to be happy. Eventually, my mother called a family meeting, which in our house always meant she wanted to control the narrative before anyone else got a chance to speak. We sat in her living room, the kids in another room with a movie playing too loud, while she launched into the speech about loyalty and how dirty laundry should not be aired in public, which was already ironic because she had been airing our business by causing scenes in lobbies and school offices. She looked at me and said I needed to stop digging around in my sister's life, that I needed to go back to helping instead of attacking. And she said all of that as if I had not been the one picking up pieces for months. I did not let her finish. I pulled out my laptop like some deranged prosecutor and started going through the folder the same way I had done with Emma in that coffee shop. Except this time, I also had my notes about the kids being left alone, the missed school pickups, the nights at my place before big meetings. I laid it all out. For a second, there was this stunned silence, like the air had been sucked out of the room. Emma started sobbing, saying I was making her look like a monster, that she didn't actually hurt anyone, that the kids were fine, that I was exaggerating everything because I couldn't stand to see her happy. She said mothers needed breaks, that she was doing her best, that if I had kids, I would crumble in a week. Then my mother snapped in a way I had never seen before. She yelled that she couldn't keep doing this, that she was tired of raising children that were not hers, that she had already sacrificed her entire youth for us and was not going to do it again for her grandchildren. She admitted loudly that she knew exactly how much Emma went out and how often the kids were left alone, and that she had looked the other way because she felt guilty about how her daughter's love life had turned out. She said she had pressured me to help because I was the one without real responsibilities and she didn't see any other option. It was like watching a dam break. Except instead of water, there were decades of resentment and bad decisions pouring out all over the floor. I sat there stunned, realizing I had become the designated solution for problems I had not created. Basically, the family backup plan they all assumed would always be available as long as I didn't have kids of my own. The kids, by the way, were still in the next room, probably not hearing every word, but definitely absorbing the tension in the walls. And that thought finally pushed me over the edge. The next morning, after a night of lying awake staring at the ceiling, I picked up my phone and did something my mother had always said was the worst possible betrayal you could commit against family. I called Child Protective Services. I will not lie and say that phone call made me feel heroic. I was shaking so hard I had to sit on my kitchen floor, and my voice kept catching as I explained the situation to the woman on the other end of the line, this calm stranger who asked me for details and dates while my stomach twisted in knots. I told her about the kids being left alone at night for hours, about the missed school pickups, about my mother dropping them at my office, about the evidence I had collected from social media and messages. She asked if there had been physical abuse, and I said I had never seen any, but that the emotional neglect and constant instability felt like a slow-motion train wreck. She took my information, promised someone would follow up, and I hung up, feeling like I had just detonated something I could never unexplode. The process that followed was not fast or clean like people imagine. There were phone calls, forms, a social worker assigned to the case who came to Emma's apartment and to my place, asking questions, looking around, trying to piece together a picture that matched or contradicted what I had reported. Emma lost it when she found out. Called me screaming, saying I had ruined her chances of ever having a normal life, that no man would ever want to be with someone who had a file with Child Protective Services, that I had made her kids targets for the system. My mother alternated between sobbing and guilt-tripping, begging me to withdraw the report, then accusing me of wanting to steal the kids from Emma so I could finally be the perfect one. The social worker interviewed the kids at school in a small office with pastel posters on the wall that did not make the room any less heavy. The oldest talked about nights alone and being in charge when mom went out in this calm, matter-of-fact voice that made it even worse because you could hear how normal it felt to her. The younger two mentioned waiting at school, eating cereal for dinner, sleeping on my couch, and none of it sounded dramatic to them. It was just their life. The social worker wrote things down, asked follow-up questions, and I watched from a distance, feeling like the worst person alive. And also like this was the only way anything was going to change. They did not swoop in and take the kids away, which I had been terrified and weirdly half expecting they would do, because we love extremes in our heads. Instead, they gave Emma a formal warning and put together a safety plan that spelled out, in boring bureaucratic language, what should have been obvious from the beginning: the kids needed an adult present. School pickups could not be optional. Overnights out required reliable childcare arranged in advance. She was required to attend parenting classes, and there would be follow-up visits, unannounced ones, to check if things were actually improving. My mother was told very clearly that using me as a last-minute solution without my consent was not a viable system, and that everyone needed to respect boundaries if they wanted to avoid further intervention. Emma did not take it as a wake-up call. She took it as proof that I had declared war. She went on a mission to salvage her image, starting online by posting vague messages about toxic family members who couldn't stand to see a single mother happy, and then more direct ones accusing me of being jealous and judgmental. In one particularly dramatic post, she wrote that her own sister had reported her to the government just because she dared to have a life. And I watched as comments poured in from people who only knew her party version, calling me a monster, saying I should be ashamed of myself. One of her friends recognized my company logo in a picture and mentioned my workplace by name. And suddenly, my personal mess had crawled into my professional life in the worst possible way. I started getting snide messages from strangers. A few even sent to my work email, calling me bitter and cruel, saying I obviously hated children. I spent a whole afternoon drafting and deleting responses before finally just closing my laptop and putting my phone in a drawer. Then Emma crossed a line I did not think she would. She called the human resources department at my firm and told them she was worried about her kids' safety because of my anger issues, implying that I yelled at them or treated them badly when they were with me. I found out about it when HR emailed me asking me to come in for a meeting to discuss a family matter that had been brought to their attention. Walking into that conference room felt worse than walking into any client meeting I had ever had. There was the HR manager looking serious but neutral, and my direct supervisor who looked confused and slightly worried. They asked me what was going on, and I had to lay out the entire situation in the most concise, non-hysterical way possible, which is not easy when your voice keeps wobbling and your hands are shaking. I told them about the kids, the babysitting, the missed promotion, the call to Child Protective Services, the online posts. I showed them the documentation I had, careful to leave out anything that was not necessary, and waited to see if this would be the moment my career finally collapsed under the weight of my family's chaos. To their credit, they believed me. The HR manager even said she had dealt with similar situations before, that family dynamics could get messy and bleed into work, and that the company's main concern was whether I was doing my job and not creating a hostile environment. They noted the complaint, documented my side, and told me to let them know immediately if Emma or anyone else tried to involve the company again. My boss gave me a look that was equal parts sympathy and please get this under control. And I walked out of that room feeling both relieved and exhausted, like I had just run a marathon while carrying 3 screaming toddlers on my back. After that, I had no interest in going back to the version of myself that said yes to everything just to keep the peace. When the social worker came back with the safety plan, I made it clear that if they were counting on me as part of the support network, it would only be on my terms. I said I could help with school pickups occasionally if I had at least a day's notice and if it did not interfere with crucial meetings. And I could watch the kids for a few hours on weekends if Emma was doing something like actual errands or appointments, not bar hopping. I wrote those conditions down and handed them to the social worker and Emma at the same time because I wanted there to be no confusion, no room for twisting my words later. Emma looked offended, like I was drafting a contract for a stranger instead of talking to family. And my mother started to say I was being dramatic. But the social worker actually backed me up. She said clear boundaries were important, that overextending a support person could lead to burnout and resentment. And I almost laughed at how surreal it felt to have a stranger validate something I had been screaming into a void for months. Emma agreed out loud because she did not have much choice if she wanted the case to stay at the warning stage. But I could see the resentment settling in behind her eyes, like a storm that had been postponed, not cancelled. The classes did not magically turn her into a different person. She stopped leaving the kids alone overnight, at least as far as I could tell, and she became more careful about school pickups, probably because she knew someone was watching now. But the attitude, the resentment, the stubborn belief that she was being punished for wanting a life, that stayed. A few weeks after the plan was in place, she had a small relapse, as the social worker later called it. She left the kids with a neighbor down the hall without asking if the woman was actually available, then went out anyway. The neighbor, overwhelmed and unsure, dug up the contact card Emma had left with my number on it and called me around 8 in the evening, apologizing and asking if this arrangement was normal. That phone call hit me like a cold wave. For a moment, the old reflex almost kicked in, the one that would have had me grabbing my keys and rushing over there to fix things. But instead, I took a breath, thanked the neighbor for letting me know, and then called the social worker. I explained what was happening, and she wrote it down as a violation of the safety plan. The next day, she went to Emma's apartment for an unannounced visit. Emma got a stern warning that any more of that behavior would push the case into much more serious territory. My mother called me afterward, crying and saying I was going too far, that I was destroying the family from the inside. And I told her as calmly as I could that I would rather have a broken family than kids left alone in dangerous situations. I would love to say I handled everything with perfect composure after that. But I didn't. The night after that neighbor call, I had my first full-blown panic episode in years. Sitting on the bathroom floor of my apartment with my back against the tub, hands tingling, heart racing so fast I thought I was going to pass out. I kept replaying my mother's words in my head, hearing Emma's accusations, picturing the kids' faces. For a while, I honestly wondered if I had made everything worse instead of better. I eventually managed to breathe through it, talking to myself out loud like a ridiculous person, reminding myself that the goal was not to be liked. It was to keep the kids safe. But the emotional hangover lasted for days. Months went by. Emma's social media shifted into something more curated, less obviously wild, with more pictures of the kids and fewer shots of drinks and bar bathrooms. The captions changed, too. All about family time and grateful for my little crew. If you didn't know the backstory, you would think she was the most devoted mother on the planet. People commented things like, "You are such a strong woman, and the kids are lucky to have you." And I had to stop myself from laughing bitterly because I knew how much of that was damage control. Some people who did know pieces of the story started leaving more pointed comments asking who watched the kids when she was out at night, and those would mysteriously disappear after a while. About 6 months after the initial explosion, there was a birthday party for the oldest. A backyard kind of thing with cheap decorations and a cake that had definitely been ordered at the last minute. The whole extended family showed up. Some out of genuine love, some out of curiosity, some because my mother guilt them into it. I went because the kid had asked me to, not because I wanted to endure another round of passive-aggressive comments. The atmosphere was tense under the fake cheerfulness. And my mother made sure to make little comments, just loud enough for others to hear, about how some people think they are better than everyone just because they have a career, and how families should keep their problems within their own walls. At one point during the party, the middle child, now 5, tugged on my sleeve and asked in a worried voice who would be picking her up from school on Monday, like it was a test with a right and wrong answer. Emma, overhearing, jumped in with a too bright smile and said she would, of course, like always. But the kid didn't look convinced, just nodded slowly and went back to playing. I noticed the oldest walking around making sure everyone had cake, wiping a spill, checking on her little brother when he started to cry after tripping. And I realized she was still doing that mini-adult thing, carrying weight she had not chosen. On the drive home, I cried, not because of any one specific thing that had happened, but because of the constant ache of knowing that even with systems in place, some damage was already done. Not long after that, the oldest asked if she could spend a weekend at my place. I said, yes, of course. We ended up sitting at my small kitchen table on Saturday night, eating takeout and painting our nails, when she suddenly got very serious. She told me she didn't really believe her mother anymore when she promised to be back by a certain time or to change for real. That she always waited and checked the clock and prepared her siblings for the possibility that they would be on their own for a while. Hearing that from a 9-year-old felt like a punch to the gut. She said she was glad I had called those people who made the rules, even though it made everyone mad, because at least now there were fewer nights alone. My sister came to pick her up the next day, looking slightly softer around the edges, like she had been thinking about something heavier than her usual drama. She overheard part of our conversation at the door and froze for a second when she realized what her daughter had said. There was this flash of shame on her face, real and raw, before she rearranged it into her usual defensive expression and changed the subject. But I saw it. And for the first time in a long time, I thought maybe, just maybe, something had gotten through that thick wall of denial. Around that time, I heard through a mutual contact that she had lost a part-time job she had picked up to prove she was responsible. Now, the story, as it filtered back to me, was that she kept showing up late, leaving early, or asking for sudden schedule changes because of babysitter issues. Eventually, her boss got tired of it. Someone at that workplace happened to know bits of what had been going on with Child Protective Services and my role in it. And the whole situation turned into a messy gossip loop that did nothing good for anyone's reputation. Part of me felt bad for her, because losing that job meant more financial stress. But another part of me thought, not for the first time, that consequences were the only language some people really understood. My own work life slowly and quietly started to heal. I kept my head down, showed up on time, avoided personal calls in the office, and did my best to keep my family drama from spilling into my professional world again. The person who had gotten the promotion instead of me turned out to be competent but overwhelmed, and I ended up helping her more than once, mentoring her in a less official way. I tried not to think about how that could have been me if things had gone differently, because that road only led to resentment I didn't have energy for. I focused instead on building a track record that would be hard to ignore the next time an opportunity came up. And slowly, my bosses started to notice again that I was not just the woman with the messy home life. I was also the one who could handle complex clients and put out fires without losing my mind. Eventually, another position opened up. Not exactly the same one I had missed before, but close enough in level and responsibility. My boss pulled me aside and told me she thought I should apply, that she had seen how I had stabilized things and taken control, and that she believed I was ready. I applied, went through the interviews with sweaty hands and a tight smile. And when the email came saying I had been selected, I cried on my couch for a solid 10 minutes before calling the one friend who knew every detail of the past year and screaming into the phone. It didn't erase the previous disappointment, but it felt like proof that I had not completely sabotaged my own life by choosing to protect my nieces and nephew. My mother tried to use my promotion as an excuse to suggest a big family dinner, a chance to move past everything as long as I agreed not to bring up the past or attack anyone. I said no, politely but firmly. I told her I was open to honest conversations, even uncomfortable ones, but not to manufactured harmony that required me to pretend nothing had happened. She accused me once again of thinking I was better than everyone, of valuing my career over my family. And I realized we might never see eye to eye on this. I also realized that was okay. I didn't need her approval to know I had done the right thing, even if the way I did it was messy and painful. A year after the first call to Child Protective Services, we all ended up in the same room again, for a good reason. The oldest had a little ceremony at school, a reading program graduation where kids got certificates for meeting their goals. The gym was crowded and loud with folding chairs and a slightly broken microphone, and my mother complained the whole time about the noise and the lack of air conditioning. Emma sat rigid in her seat, glancing around as if she expected people to be judging her. And the kids bounced in their chairs, excited and restless. When the oldest went up on stage to get her certificate, she surprised everyone by saying a few words into the microphone. My aunt, who always listens to me and taught me that women can make different choices and still be important. You could feel the air shift. My mother's face tightened. Emma's eyes filled with tears as she tried to blink them away. And I sat there, frozen in my metal chair, trying not to ugly cry in a school gym. It was not some triumphant movie moment where everyone hugged and apologized after. It was awkward and tense and quiet. On the way out, my mother muttered under her breath that I had clearly turned the kid against her own mother and that I always needed to be the star of the show. And I almost laughed because even in that moment, she managed to twist a 9-year-old's gratitude into an attack. We walked out into the parking lot together, but not together, if that makes sense. My mother and Emma went to one car, the kids piled in, and I went to mine, clutching the little program the school had handed out. Emma paused for a second before getting in, looked at me, and said quietly that she knew she had messed up, that she was still mad at me, but that she also could not deny things were better for the kids now. It was the closest thing to an acknowledgement I was probably ever going to get, and I took it, even if it came wrapped in resentment. I told her I didn't want to take her place. I just wanted the kids to be okay. She nodded, looked down, and then got in the car without another word. So, no, we didn't end up as some perfectly healed family that takes matching pictures in coordinated outfits for the holidays. My mother still thinks I crossed an unforgivable line by involving outsiders. My sister still thinks I betrayed her. And family gatherings, when they happen, are tense and carefully controlled. But the kids are safer. They are not spending nights alone in an apartment. They are not being forgotten at school as often. And the oldest does not have to be the only line of defense anymore. I lost a promotion and some illusion of being the good daughter in the process. But I gained something I didn't realize I needed so badly, the ability to look at myself in the mirror and not flinch at the person staring back. If you asked my mother, she would probably tell you I destroyed our family. If you asked my sister, she would say I ruined her life. If you asked me, sitting here in my slightly too small apartment with my fancy new job title and my very quiet evenings, I would tell you that I finally stopped letting everyone else write my story for me. It's not a happy ending with a bow on top. But it is honest. And sometimes, that is the only kind of ending you get. There are still nights when I lie awake and replay individual moments in my head. Like that lobby scene at my office. Or the time I pulled up to the school and saw 3 little faces pressed against the glass doors. And I question every step I took and every word I said. Because that is what you do when you have been trained your entire life to keep the peace instead of telling the truth. I think about all the times I swallowed my anger because I didn't want to be called dramatic. All the times I canceled plans and told people I was just tired because saying, "My family treats my time like it belongs to them," sounded too harsh. I remember sitting on my kitchen floor after that phone call to Child Protective Services, feeling like I had just burned down my own house, and wishing there was some version of events where everybody could be happy and nobody had to be the villain in someone else's story. People love to say that family is everything, that blood is thicker than anything, that you are supposed to forgive and forget because that is what good daughters do. And I used to repeat those lines to myself like a script whenever my stomach twisted at something my mother said or did. Now, when someone throws one of those phrases at me, I just smile and think about how none of those sayings mention what you are supposed to do when family is the reason a 9-year-old knows how to hide how scared she is so the younger kids don't freak out. I think about how nobody writes cute quotes about the aunt who is the only one reading the permission slips or making sure there is enough food in the pantry, because that kind of love is boring and unglamorous and does not look good in a framed print on the wall. Sometimes I catch myself scrolling through old pictures of holidays before everything blew up, and I can see the cracks now that I didn't want to see then. My mother, posing with the kids like they were props. My sister slightly off to the side with her phone in her hand. Me in the background, balancing a dish in one hand and someone's jacket in the other. Back then, I would have told you we were just a little chaotic, that every family had some drama, nothing too serious. If you had told me I would one day be the one calling strangers to come evaluate our mess, I would have laughed and said that was not my style, that I could handle things on my own. Turns out there are limits to what one person can juggle while everyone else keeps throwing more balls in the air and calling it helping out. The funniest thing, and I do mean funny in the darkest way, is how ordinary my life looks from the outside. If you don't know any of this, I'm the woman in business casual on the train, checking her email, scrolling through a social media app, listening to a podcast about budgeting or whatever. I buy groceries. I pay rent on time. I complain about the laundry I haven't folded yet. I watch shows at night and text my friends about how tired I am. There is no sign on my forehead that says nearly lost her career because she couldn't stop being the default caregiver or reported her own sister because nobody else would listen. Most days I am just another person standing in line for coffee, thinking about whether I remembered to bring my lunch or if I am going to cave and buy something I don't need. Every now and then, when I'm out running errands on a weekend, I will see a mother at a park or in a store, looking exhausted but still counting heads and wiping noses and juggling bags. And I feel this weird mix of admiration and sadness. I wonder if she has someone who shows up when she really needs help, someone who doesn't guilt her for asking or disappear when things get hard. I wonder if there is an aunt like me in her orbit, someone quietly holding everything together, or if she is doing it mostly alone and pretending she is fine because admitting otherwise feels dangerous. I want to tell every version of that woman that wanting a break does not make her a bad mother, but that the line between needing rest and handing responsibility to someone who never agreed to carry it is thinner than people think. I guess what I am trying to say, in the messiest way possible, is that doing the right thing does not always feel good. And sometimes it looks really ugly up close. There was no moment where violins played and everyone thanked me for being brave. There were accusations and silent treatments and group chats I am pretty sure I was removed from. There were holidays I did not attend because I could not handle pretending everything was fine while my mother told a version of the story where I was the villain. There were lonely nights where I stared at my phone, tempted to send some long apologetic message just to reset the dynamic back to something familiar. Even if that something familiar had been slowly killing me. But then I think about my niece standing in that school gym, holding a piece of paper and saying that I taught her women can choose different paths and still matter. And something in my chest unclenches a little. I think about the fact that she knows now, in a way she can feel, that there is at least one adult in her life who will pick up the phone, who will show up on time, who will not leave her alone just because someone texted with a better offer. I think about how she is watching me as much as she is watching her mother and grandmother, taking notes the way kids always do, even when you think they are just playing. And I want the notes she takes from me to be things like, you are allowed to say no, and you do not have to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. So no, I am not sitting here pretending I am some noble hero. I am just a tired woman who hit her limit and chose the option that hurt less in the long run. Even though it felt like tearing my own skin off at the time. I still miss the idea of an easy family sometimes. The fantasy version where everybody steps up without being asked and nobody throws guilt like confetti whenever you try to rest. That version never really existed, but it lived in my head for a long time. And letting it go was its own kind of grief. Now I have something different, something smaller and less shiny, but real. I have my own space, my own boundaries, my own job that is finally starting to reflect how hard I work. And 3 kids who know my door is open for them, not as an emergency exit for their mother, but as a place where they are wanted just because they are themselves. If that makes me the villain in someone else's story, then fine. I would rather be that than the silent extra in my own life ever again. A few months after that school ceremony, when I thought things had settled into this uneasy truce, the social worker scheduled one of those follow-up visits. Nothing dramatic, just a check-in to make sure the safety plan was still a thing and not just a piece of paper everyone shoved in a drawer. Emma was tense about it for days, sending me messages about how she felt watched and judged and how she couldn't breathe without someone writing it down. I reminded her very calmly for once that the whole point was making sure the kids were okay, not grading her on how fun of a mom she was, but she wasn't really listening. The visit was supposed to be after school so the kids would be home and could talk in person. I was not there on purpose because I wanted Emma to handle her own apartment without me as the emotional shield. But that night, my phone lit up with the oldest's name. She almost never called me on her own. She's more of a message kind of kid. I answered, and her voice was small and shaky in a way I had not heard in a while. She told me that before the social worker showed up, Emma sat them down and tried to rehearse answers with them, telling them to say they were always together and that Grandma and Auntie only help once in a while. I could hear her taking those careful little breaths kids take when they are trying not to cry. She said she didn't want to lie because last time telling the truth made the rules people help, but she also didn't want to make her mother mad again. I had to sit down on my kitchen floor because apparently that is where all the big conversations in my life happen now. I told her as plainly as I could that talking about what really happens is not being mean or ruining things. That it is exactly what adults keep telling kids to do when something feels wrong. I said if anyone got mad at her for telling the truth, that was on them, not on her. It felt like way too much weight to put on someone that age. But lying to her would have been worse. Later, the social worker called me to say the visit had gone well enough, which is social worker language for not a total disaster, but not great either. The kids were honest. Emma was defensive. There were no new huge violations, but there were also enough little red flags to keep the file open a bit longer. When Emma found out they had told the truth about the nights alone and the neighbor thing, she lost it in a group chat with me and my mother, calling them ungrateful and accusing me of turning them against her. I did not engage. I left the messages on read and then took a very long shower to wash off the feeling of being the permanent villain in a story I did not write. Then, a few weeks later, a new character entered the scene. The guy. My sister's new boyfriend. He walked in like he owned the place, made a couple of jokes about instant family and built-in babysitters when he saw the kids, and something in me went cold. He was not evil or anything dramatic like that, just careless in that way grown men sometimes are when they think being charming excuses everything that falls out of their mouth. He cursed in front of the kids without blinking, made a comment about how Emma deserved a break, and winked at me like I was supposed to back him up, and kept interrupting the oldest whenever she tried to talk. At one point, he called the kids baggage as a joke. He laughed. Emma kind of half-laughed. And the oldest looked down so fast her hair fell in front of her face. I saw red. I do not even remember exactly what I said, but I know my voice came out sharper than usual. I told him they were human beings, not baggage, and that he could find a different word or find a different house to eat dinner in. The room went dead quiet. Emma's eyes flashed that familiar mix of embarrassment and rage. He tried to laugh it off, said he was just kidding, that I needed to relax, which is probably the worst thing you can say to someone who is obviously not relaxed. The night ended early. He left with some excuse about an early morning. Emma waited until the door closed to start yelling. She said I had scared him off, that I had no idea how hard it was for her to find someone who would even consider dating a woman with kids, that I had ruined it because I was jealous. I told her if a man could not handle being told not to call her children baggage, he was not exactly a prize. We went in circles for a while until the middle child wandered out in pajamas, rubbing her eyes, asking if everything was okay. That shut us both up. I grabbed my coat and left, my heart pounding, fully expecting a fresh wave of angry messages in the morning. Instead, what I got was silence. No texts, no calls, nothing for a few days. Then a short message from Emma, he was not that great anyway. No apology, of course, but also no more mention of him. When I saw the kids next, the oldest quietly asked if I would still come over sometimes, even if there were new people. And I told her I would always say something if anyone made her feel like she was in the way. Her shoulders dropped a little, the way you do when you did not realize how tense you were until someone told you it was okay to breathe. The ceremony in the gym is still the moment that sticks in my head the most. Though, even after everything that kept happening around it, I keep replaying little details from that day. The way Emma almost got up and walked out when they announced there would be student speeches. Like she was suddenly afraid of what her own kid might say into a microphone. The way my mother gripped her program so hard the edge bent when she heard my name come out of her granddaughter's mouth. The way the oldest looked straight at me, not at her mother or her grandmother, when she said, "Women can choose different paths and still be important." After the ceremony, things got messy. Obviously, my mother cornered me near the doors, hissing about how I had clearly coached the kid, how I was turning her into a mini version of me. Like that was the worst fate she could imagine. Emma went from crying to snapping in about 3 seconds, saying I had stolen her moment. I told them both that if hearing their own child thank someone for being there made them this angry, maybe the problem was not the speech. That did not go over well. We ended up outside in the parking lot, the three of us talking over each other while the kids waited inside with their teacher because the adults in their lives still had not learned how to fight without an audience. At some point, Emma just stopped. She looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with makeup or sleep. She said very quietly that she knew she had messed up, that she hated that her kid felt closer to me in some ways, and that she did not know how to fix it without pretending the past never happened. For once, I did not try to make her feel better. I just nodded and said I did not know either, but that pretending had not exactly worked out for us so far. We stood there in that awkward, heavy silence until my mother stormed off to get the kids, muttering about ungrateful daughters under her breath. A few days after all of that, when the dust had mostly settled and I had gone back to my normal routine of work and laundry and trying to remember if I had any clean socks left, my phone rang again. It was the oldest. No crisis this time, no visit, no drama. She just wanted to tell me about a project at school, some reading thing she was excited about, and how her mother had been home for dinner 3 nights that week. She said it in this casual way, like she was talking about the weather, but I could hear the difference underneath. 3 nights is not exactly a fairy tale, but compared to almost never, it might as well have been a miracle. We talked for a while about small stuff. A book she liked. A joke her teacher made. How her little brother still refused to eat anything green on purpose. Normal kid things. When we hung up, I sat there in my quiet apartment, phone still in my hand, and realized my shoulders were not up around my ears for once. The silence around me did not feel like the empty kind anymore. It felt like space I had carved out on purpose for the first time in years. When I look around my quiet apartment, I do not see failure or emptiness. I see peace I fought for, boundaries I bled over, and 3 small humans who know exactly where to find me if they ever need a place to land. And for now, that is everything. If you asked my mother, she would probably tell you I destroyed our family. If you asked my sister, she would say I ruined her life. If you asked me, sitting here in my slightly too small apartment with my fancy new job title and my very quiet evenings, I would tell you that I finally stopped letting everyone else write my story for me. It is not a happy ending with a bow on top. But it is honest. And sometimes that is the only kind of ending you get. There are still nights when I lie awake and replay individual moments in my head, like that lobby scene at my office or the time I pulled up to the school and saw 3 little faces pressed against the glass doors. And I question every step I took and every word I said. Because that is what you do when you have been trained your entire life to keep the peace instead of telling the truth. I think about all the times I swallowed my anger because I didn't want to be called dramatic. All the times I canceled plans and told people I was just tired because saying, "My family treats my time like it belongs to them," sounded too harsh. I remember sitting on my kitchen floor after that phone call to Child Protective Services, feeling like I had just burned down my own house, and wishing there was some version of events where everybody could be happy and nobody had to be the villain in someone else's story. People love to say that family is everything, that blood is thicker than anything, that you are supposed to forgive and forget because that is what good daughters do. And I used to repeat those lines to myself like a script whenever my stomach twisted at something my mother said or did. Now when someone throws one of those phrases at me, I just smile and think about how none of those sayings mention what you are supposed to do when family is the reason a 9-year-old knows how to hide how scared she is so the younger kids don't freak out. I think about how nobody writes cute quotes about the aunt who is the only one reading the permission slips or making sure there is enough food in the pantry because that kind of love is boring and unglamorous and does not look good in a framed print on the wall. Sometimes I catch myself scrolling through old pictures of holidays before everything blew up, and I can see the cracks now that I didn't want to see then. My mother posing with the kids like they were props. My sister slightly off to the side with her phone in her hand. Me in the background balancing a dish in one hand and someone's jacket in the other. Back then, I would have told you we were just a little chaotic, that every family had some drama, nothing too serious. If you had told me I would one day be the one calling strangers to come evaluate our mess, I would have laughed and said that was not my style, that I could handle things on my own. Turns out there are limits to what one person can juggle while everyone else keeps throwing more balls in the air and calling it helping out. The funniest thing, and I do mean funny in the dark way, is how ordinary my life looks from the outside. If you don't know any of this, I am the woman in business casual on the train, checking her email, scrolling through a social media app, listening to a podcast about budgeting or whatever. I buy groceries. I pay rent on time. I complain about the laundry I have not folded yet. I watch shows at night and text my friends about how tired I am. There is no sign on my forehead that says, nearly lost her career because she couldn't stop being the default caregiver or reported her own sister because nobody else would listen. Most days I am just another person standing in line for coffee, thinking about whether I remembered to bring my lunch or if I am going to cave and buy something I don't need. Every now and then when I am out running errands on a weekend, I will see a mother at a park or in a store, looking exhausted but still counting heads and wiping noses and juggling bags. And I feel this weird mix of admiration and sadness. I wonder if she has someone who shows up when she really needs help, someone who does not guilt her for asking or disappear when things get hard. I wonder if there is an aunt like me in her orbit, someone quietly holding everything together, or if she is doing it mostly alone and pretending she is fine because admitting otherwise feels dangerous. I want to tell every version of that woman that wanting a break does not make her a bad mother, but that the line between needing rest and handing responsibility to someone who never agreed to carry it is thinner than people think. I guess what I am trying to say in the messiest way possible is that doing the right thing does not always feel good. And sometimes it looks really ugly up close. There was no moment where violins played and everyone thanked me for being brave. There were accusations and silent treatments and group chats I am pretty sure I was removed from. There were holidays I did not attend because I could not handle pretending everything was fine while my mother told a version of the story where I was the villain. There were lonely nights where I stared at my phone, tempted to send some long apologetic message just to reset the dynamic back to something familiar. Even if that something familiar had been slowly killing me. But then I think about my niece standing in that school gym, holding a piece of paper and saying that I taught her women can choose different paths and still matter. And something in my chest unclenches a little. I think about the fact that she knows now, in a way she can feel, that there is at least one adult in her life who will pick up the phone, who will show up on time, who will not leave her alone just because someone texted with a better offer. I think about how she is watching me as much as she is watching her mother and grandmother, taking notes the way kids always do, even when you think they are just playing. And I want the notes she takes from me to be things like, you are allowed to say no, and you do not have yourself on fire to keep other people warm. So no, I am not sitting here pretending I am some noble hero. I am just a tired woman who hit her limit and chose the option that hurt less in the long run. Even though it felt like tearing my own skin off at the time. I still miss the idea of an easy family sometimes. The fantasy version where everybody steps up without being asked and nobody throws guilt like confetti whenever you try to rest. That version never really existed, but it lived in my head for a long time. And letting it go was its own kind of grief. Now I have something different, something smaller and less shiny, but real. I have my own space, my own boundaries, my own job that is finally starting to reflect how hard I work. And 3 kids who know my door is open for them, not as an emergency exit for their mother, but as a place where they are wanted just because they are themselves. If that makes me the villain in someone else's story, then fine. I would rather be that than the silent extra in my own life ever again. So, what about you? Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace in your family and doing what you knew was right, even if it meant being seen as the villain? How did you navigate those impossible choices? Share your story in the comments below. I'm really eager to hear your thoughts.